Donc, je dis, la confiture de cerise, si on arrive à les cueillir assez tôt, vu que les oiseaux viennent tout manger cette année, j'ai l'impression que quand même, tout ce qui est fruits rouges, ça perd de sa saveur. Cette année, combien me les disait, les cerises, ils n'ont rien récupéré. Non. Ça va? Ça va? Oui. Comprends. Demandera à ma mère qu'elle fasse des confitures.
So you see.
Ça va?
Sorry.
He can't stop speaking.
He has to because. But the fascinating thing that happens here, which is really a rendering in this audiovisual medium of what he expresses in these few little sentences. The conversation is totally boring. Mealtimes are agony, and her whole existence is served to her on a plate. In other words, she has to do something else. She cannot stand this anymore. And that scream at the end, when he not only talks for half an hour about the taste of the cherries, but then says, I'll ask my mother. And by then we already know that the mother and the daughter-in-law are not really close because they are very suspicious of each other's influence on the man. This is also something we recognize a lot in contemporary society. And then Emma doesn't say anything. So Charles is going to speak more and more frantically because he needs to fill the silence. So it is not only Charles doing it, it's also Emma provoking it, and the interaction is what makes it so deadly.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to say, that her intellectual input into this conversation was not very huge and overwhelming.
She could have said, okay, let's talk a little bit about the painting I saw this afternoon.
Yes.
But
She could reframe it totally from cherries.
Yeah. Yes, she could, but she didn't bother. Yeah. And that, because she already gives up. And so he gets more and more, and that's the interesting thing. On the one hand, he's really flat, but then he talks more and more fast, because he is also getting exasperated. And you see on her face, I mean, it's an incredible experience. This is in scene 6 in this sort of square space with the curtains, where you see this happen, and then opposite it you see the love affair she has, and you understand, right? You understand totally, except that there again she doesn't have a lot of input other than clinging, and she gets into the same situation.
But there's also, like, another reference. I don't know if you remember the scene from The Citizen Kane, when the king has his, meals, breakfasts with his wife, and also this famous, montage sequence that shows that, that disintegration of their marriage, and, how they contribute to this, involuntary. So
no, definitely. Ingmar Bergman's scenes from a marriage, where you also have these moments. Now, there are lots of references in cinema to boredom, but we really found it important to almost isolate it, to make the boredom one scene, one screen, where it goes on and on and on. Now, of course, in the film, we have had to sort of do a montage between all these scenes, and you will see when Daniel is screening it that it is a very different effect. But yeah, that's an interesting.
I'm wondering about boredom being also the condition of capitalism as such, as the state where the desire is being born. Because what is striking about Flaubert and your project also is the fact that you estimate the influence of boredom on contemporary capitalism. Whereas, for example, in the neo-avant-garde movements or art and music especially, boredom was considered being anti-capitalist. I mean, being a subversive force, in fact, which was to a certain degree a misconception, because boredom is in fact a condition of
Yeah, I think you could
capital.
You could have a really interesting dialogue between that avant-garde perspective and the contemporary one, and say, yes, capitalism is also based on boredom, but the anti-capitalist interpretation isn't totally wrong, because capitalism tries to seduce you with the idea that it is against boredom.
Yeah.
And so then boredom becomes the force against it. But the deception is, of course, that there's nothing more boring than going fun shopping every afternoon, except that it ruins your budget. But it is, and this whole notion of fun shopping,
Yeah.
that's the notion of today. And it's in the magazines. People describe fun shopping. Let's go fun shopping, and you get a list of addresses of fun shops. So that is, on the one hand, totally boring, but it keeps you, is promising you something else, that excitement.
Yeah, but what I meant is also that this conception that Flaubert had, I mean, which we can say that he had now.
Yeah.
It's coming back now, for example, with books like Eldridge Palmer's Boring Formless Nonsense, where he reconsiders really the amount of boredom in art as being really non-productive. And for example, for David Foster Wallace, the late David Foster Wallace, The Pale King, which is a novel about boredom being a condition of capitalism. That's the interesting point, that this anachronism that you are mentioning here is really really productive in the sense to estimate the amount of boredom, and boredom being the condition.
Yeah. No, it is, I agree, it is a condition. Yeah. But the one little difference that makes all the difference for people who are easy to seduce is that it doesn't announce its own boredom. It's a condition, it's behind it, but it pretends the opposite.
And it's perhaps fueled by capitalism's constant message hammering home, you must be permanently excited by, stimulated and excited, but that in itself is a fallacy, because very quickly you'll tire of that level of stimulation. So
we just did the next chapter.
You need some avant-garde art to get you bored.
But also, I suppose that what matters here in this particular scene is the sexual difference and how it intersects with the issue of boredom, right? Because Margaret Atwood has this wonderful sentence in The Handmaid's Tale, maybe boredom is erotic when women do it, not men, right? And she's supposed to be bored in an erotic way, and then she naturally drifts into love affairs, right? Or she is sexually aroused when she does shopping, right? Because we can see that, how she's enjoying herself, that's a surrogate activity, right? Whereas men here are more or less active, apart from Rudolph. We don't see his activities, right, apart from seduction. But Charles obviously has serious business on his mind, right? So he's not supposed to be bored. But she's not supposed to be, he's boring. Right, exactly. Whereas she's bored, but she never takes any initiative, and that's really exasperating. The fact that she embraces passivity so totally.
That is the crux of this character, right? That she has all these talents. She had a good education, basically. She was the star in the singing class. She had this understanding of art, and she does nothing with it. And part of that, you can say, oh, what a bad woman that she is so passive. But then her whole situation encourages that. So there is a constant questioning, I mean, for us, and we hope for the viewers of this exhibition, constant questioning, where does it come from? It's not individual. It's not that this is a woman who was too lazy to do something with her life. It is a social pressure. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, it's sort of course it is boring when your husband leaves in the morning with his medical bag and he goes off and he comes late, he wants a meal and that's all, and then he chats and they go to bed, whatever happens there. But the point is that we try to make it so that it is not individual, and that's the indistinction that Flaubert implements in his free and direct discourse, is that you cannot so easily attribute it to this person or that person. It is really the whole social setting.
Yeah. Okay.